You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, when it rains, it pours for Donald Trump. Yesterday, he failed in his effort to get his New York State case moved from the state court system to the federal court system. That means that we had some bad news today. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, another obstacle has been cleared off the road to Donald Trump's first criminal sentencing. So Donald Trump has repeatedly tried to convince a federal court judge in New York to have the case transferred from state court, where he was just successfully prosecuted and convicted of 34 felony counts, and he's now pending sentencing, have it transferred from state court over to federal court. He tried it about a year ago before his trial in New York State Court ever commenced, and Judge Alvin Hellerstein, the presiding federal court judge, said, no, defendant Trump, everything you did in this hush money scheme and falsifying business records to try to gain unfair advantage in a presidential election, it was all private conduct. None of it was official presidential conduct. So you have no legal basis to have your case removed or transferred from state court to federal court. Denied. Well, now Donald Trump, desperate to avoid his upcoming sentencing, tried again. He said, but Judge Hellerstein, we want to file a second notice because the Supreme Court in the interim has said that I can't be prosecuted for any official presidential acts. And I urge everybody to read Judge Hellerstein's 3-page judicial smackdown of Donald Trump and his lawyers, because he said, didn't I tell you a year ago that everything you did was private conduct, not official presidential conduct? Nothing has changed. Denied. So then what did Donald Trump do? Well, he immediately tried to file a motion seeking permission to file another notice of removal. And what we learned today, Brian, was Judge Hellerstein again denied that third attempt, and Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor who is actually handling Donald Trump's New York State case, packaged it up, provided it to Judge Juan Merchan, the New York State Court judge, and said, Judge, this now clears away yet another obstacle to Donald Trump's rapidly approaching sentencing date, which you have set for September 18th.
No, Glenn, notably, Alvin Bragg had been deferential to the court in terms of whether the sentencing should move forward. Does this signal some type of change in course here? Because Alvin Bragg is now saying that Donald Trump's bid to renew his case has been rejected, and so there is no need to delay sentencing here?
Yeah, Brian, great question. It's a little bit complicated procedurally because this clears away one obstacle. There's no doubt about that. But what you're referring to is a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump said to the state court judge, Judge Merchan, listen, when you rule on September 16th that I don't have any presidential immunity, if you rule that way, then before we go to sentencing 2 days later on September 18th, Judge, I am going to be filing appeals with every court in the land, state, federal, anybody who will hear me, because I want to put a stop to my sentencing. And that's when we got that little bit of deference from Alvin Bragg's prosecutors, because in response, they said, you know what, we will defer to the court. In other words, we will leave it in your capable hands, Judge Merchan, as to whether you want to kick the September 18th sentencing date based on Donald Trump's threats of an appeal, or whether you want to keep it in place. So, like I say, this is one hurdle that's been overcome today, but there is still that open question as to whether between the 16th and the 18th, Donald Trump filing all these appeals will succeed in putting a stop or a stay to his sentencing on the 18th. And that is a question that we won't have an answer to until probably September 16th.
Glenn, there have been a few hurdles that Donald Trump has been contending with in the lead up to this September 16th question of whether or not this will move forward. Does the fact that he's been losing thus far offer any indication, allow you to read the tea leaves at all in terms of whether Donald Trump will ultimately be successful on the 16th in terms of blocking this sentencing from moving forward?
I think the answer to that question is yes. We can take some lessons away from all of Donald Trump's losses because we're learning a little bit more about how the judiciary writ large, state court judges, federal court judges, appellate court judges, I'm going to get to the Supreme Court in a minute, how they are viewing this asinine claim of presidential immunity for paying off, porn stars and falsifying business records and burying deeply damaging information from the American voters, criminally so. We see for the first time a federal court judge, Judge Hellerstein, in the aftermath of the Supreme Court presidential immunity ruling, saying, look, I've considered this, and none of what Donald Trump did, none of what Donald Trump was convicted of in that New York State court case represents official presidential conduct for which he is immune. So yeah, we can absolutely take some lessons away from all of Donald Trump's losses. We're learning a little bit more from each one. Donald Trump is running out of rope. Here's the problem. Let's go all the way up to the Supreme Court. They seem to have a great big spool of rope, and they keep giving Donald Trump a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. You know, at some point, are they going to finally say, you know, we have to let the law run its course against this abject criminal former president the way it would run its course against any other American who committed crimes against the people of the United States? And I hope at some point the Supreme Court stops giving Donald Trump, you know, more and more rope, and he loses his grip and he drops right into an orange jumpsuit in a jail cell, which is where he belongs for the crimes he has committed.
Glenn, Judge Hellerstein is a federal judge, and I know that the Supreme Court can kind of do whatever it wants regardless of what happens in courts below it, but does it offer some precedent that even is going to be taken into account a little bit when the Supreme Court ultimately does get this request by Donald Trump to consider delaying his appeal? I mean, now we do have a response from a federal judge, not just a New York State judge, but a federal judge who's weighed in here. And so how much will that matter as Donald Trump makes his play for some delay here in his sentencing?
Brian, that's a great story. It's a great point. And it is sort of a bigger news story. It's a bigger legal development than I think people realize. As you say, this is a federal court judge, longtime federal court judge, well-respected federal court judge who said, yeah, I had a look at the Supreme Court's new ruling, and Donald Trump doesn't qualify. He doesn't benefit from it, given the conduct and the crimes he committed. Now, you use the word precedent. A lower court can't set precedent for a higher court, but Supreme Court justices, I do believe, when they're being honest brokers of the law, take into account and take seriously what the trial court judges on the federal bench say, what the circuit court appeals judges say on the federal bench. They take it all into account. I don't think they dismiss it out of hand, and I think the fact that we now have a highly regarded federal court judge making the first ruling, it's not precedent, but it is an important voice of reason.
Okay. Well, things are moving very quickly here, and as we approach this September 16th date, which is the date where we're going to have that first hearing, in advance of September 18th, which was the day slated so far to have some sentencing for Donald Trump's New York convictions, all of this is approaching really quickly, and we're going to have a lot of movement between now and then. So for those watching, if you want to follow along with everything that happens, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.